And on your screen, Tim Miller, Sarah Longwell, and Jonathan V. Last, in that order. They are the co-hosts of a podcast called The Next Level. They work at the Bulwark. Sarah Longwell, what is the Bulwark?
The Bulwark is a magazine that we started actually after the Weekly Standard was shut down for being insufficiently pro-Trump in 2019. And we took some of the old Weekly Standard staff and then some new voices. But it was essentially people who had been Republicans or conservatives their entire lives, but were alarmed by Trump and Trumpism that had overtaken the Republican Party.
Does that describe your politics?
It describes my politics precisely, yes. And in fact, all of us, Tim, JVL, and I, our politics are actually pretty different from each other, but I think if you were describing us broadly, you could describe all of us as a conservative or a Republican who kind of jumped off the train once Trump entered the picture.
Well, let's ask some questions then and get into it. We're going to take calls with these three as well. Jonathan V. Last, or JVL as they call you. What are the strengths that President Biden brings to his reelection campaign?
Unemployment rate is very, very low. The economy is, by all the actual objective numbers, doing in okay shape. America is basically, peace and prosperity, which is typically good for your normal incumbent reelect. The danger is the age problem, which just hangs over him like a pall, and I think it's overblown, but it is definitely salient for voters, which means that whether or not it's a good argument, it's a real argument. But the real historic nature of this is that it's the first time in anybody who is alive's memory when you have two guys who have actually been president running against each other. And that the lack of there being a real true insurgent and having both of them be quasi-incumbent presidents is the thing which I think makes that matchup so unbelievably hard to understand how it'll play out in voters' minds.
Tim Miller, describe your politics and what you think the Republicans bring to the table in the 2024.
Yeah, Sarah was trying to make me a conservative. I don't know. I was always the moderate, squishy Republican who worked for John Huntsman and Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush in all these primaries, and so it was natural for me to hop off the train once a insane, far right, bigoted charlatan like Donald Trump became the nominee of the party. Now about to be the nominee for the party for the third time. I think that the strengths that the Republicans bring to the primary or to the general election next year is mostly related to everyday voter concerns about the economy, and I think that inflation, despite the fact that it's going down, persists as something that is frustrating for people in their day-to-day lives. People who are budgeting, people who haven't had a increase in their salary or their wages over the last 4 years are spending more on groceries, on restaurants, on rent, on everything. So I think that could be an issue for Joe Biden. I mean, despite the fact that he won an overwhelming landslide in the popular vote, it was very narrow in the 4 states that determined the election. And so I think that if you're looking at a likely rematch, that is the thing that worries me. Can Trump get enough of a bump with non-college working class voters to kind of flip that narrow victory in the swing states?
Sarah Longwell, do you agree with Tim that President Trump's renomination on the GOP side is inevitable?
I think it's close to inevitable. I hate to say anything's inevitable when there are a lot of factors still out there. He's got a lot of legal troubles. I think the reason that many of us have come to the conclusion that he's inevitable is not specifically about Trump, but actually about his challengers. Whether it's Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Tim Scott, there just doesn't seem to be anybody else who is rising to the occasion and capturing the imagination of Republican voters. And I think there was a bunch of mistakes that these candidates made. Many of them tried to run as either mini Trumps, like Ron DeSantis, and tried to sort of wrestle Trump for his hardcore base. or they're trying to split the difference, like Nikki Haley, where she criticizes him a little bit, but then otherwise talks about how he was a great president and tries to adopt some of the ways that he also talks to the base, which makes her look a little bit phony. And so basically, because none of these candidates, these challengers, were willing to criticize Trump, take him on, presented an alternative vision that was compelling, it looks like we've got Trump again. Yeah.
I agree with that a little. Can I just chime in, though? It's also a little bit about Trump. I mean, Republican voters, I know it's a lot about Trump. Republican voters, 80% of them like Trump. He attempted a coup. He tried to stay in power against the will of the people. You would think that Republican voters might have thought that was a time to take an off-ramp. They didn't. They took the opposite. And so Trump came into this race with overwhelming positive rating among Republican voters because they like MAGA Republicanism. They like Trump. And so I agree with Sarah that his opponents have been very weak. But I think the reason why he's very likely going to be nominated again is because that's what Republican voters want.
Now, Jonathan V. last,
Yeah,
there was a little bit of news about Nikki Haley in a recent poll topping President Biden, and she was the one Republican that was topping him. What's your take on that? Are we not talking about Nikki Haley enough?
I think we're talking about Nikki Haley at precisely the right level because she has no chance to be the nominee of the Republican Party. I don't think she could. She's not going to beat Donald Trump. She probably couldn't beat Ron DeSantis. She certainly couldn't beat Vivek Ramaswamy in the Republican nominating contest, should either of the other two disappear. And she's not going to be vice president. So it's interesting to see that she's polling above Biden in one poll. But I would say this echoes something that we saw in the last Seltzer poll that we got out of Iowa, where they asked Republican voters in Iowa, what do you care more about? Having somebody who can beat Biden or somebody who is, the phrase they used was aligned with your values, which is sort of a, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, is one of us MAGA types. And by a huge margin, it was more than 20 points. The Iowa voters said, Iowa Republicans said, much more important to have a candidate who's going to be aligned with their values. So, Nikki showing that she is stronger against Biden is another data point showing that Republicans are less interested in the electability argument than they are in getting themselves more Trump. But also, the truth is Trump can win. This is, I actually don't buy the argument that, Trump is the weakest general election candidate the Republicans can field. He turns out a whole bunch of low propensity voters who don't exist without him on the ticket. Down ballot Republicans have done very well and have outperformed him in every election in which he has been at the top of the ticket. They do less well when he's not there, and it's because he brings out these low information, low propensity voters who won't show up for anybody but him. And because the structural advantage is built into the Electoral College, he has at worst, at absolute worst, a 30-70 chance of winning, and probably has closer to a 50-50 coin flip chance of beating Biden.
Sarah Longwell, I apologize for interrupting you. Go ahead.
No, I just want to go back to fighting with Tim, because there was a moment about 10, 11 months ago where there really was a big chunk of the Republican Party. I do focus groups regularly. I have another podcast at the Bulwark called the Focus Group Podcast. And, after the election of 2022, which was dismal for Trump, in the focus groups, there was a ton of DeSantis curiosity from the voters. They really thought it was time to move on from Trump, and they were interested in moving on to Ron DeSantis. And I think that one of the big stories about this primary campaign is the total weakness of Ron DeSantis when he became an actual candidate, and the failure of his strategy, which was, there was this sort of 35% of the Republican Party that was willing to move on. He could have consolidated that group and then moved into kind of the camp of the maybe Trumpers. And instead, he tried to be exactly like Trump and wrestle Trump for his base, his very committed base. And that was a huge tactical error. But I think that where I agree with Tim, though, and I think what's really important to emphasize, and it really is the genesis of the Bulwark and everything, is how much the Republican Party has completely changed from what it once was. The fact is, the vast majority of the Republican Party does either want Trump or somebody just like Trump. I mean, when people talked about Ron DeSantis and their interest in moving on from him, it was, well, he's Trump without the baggage, or he's Trump with a mute button, or he's Trump not on steroids. And so they still wanted Trump in essence. They just wanted somebody that they thought was maybe slightly more electable. And so I think that notion, this idea that the Republican Party wants somebody Trumpy, is the story of the Republican Party today.
Well, Sarah Longwell and Tim and Jonathan, Mike Pence just gave a speech in New Hampshire about populism versus conservatism. Tim Scott is running a classic Reagan Morning in America campaign. Why are they not catching on?
Tim Scott's at 1%. Tim Scott's at 1% in the polls. The only people that like him are rich Republican donors that are funding his campaign. Mike Pence gives that speech about how we're in a fight for the soul of the party. Well, he's at 6% in the polls, and the Maga candidates, Trump, DeSantis, and Vivek, combined for 80%. It's like
not much of a fight.
The fight for the soul of the party happened. It happened in 2016. The three of us were on the field, fighting for the classically liberal side of the Republican Party. Mike Pence's name was on the bumper sticker, fighting for the MAGA, nationalist, conspiratorial side of the party. The populist side, they won. The nationalist side already won. Mike Pence now wants to fight this battle, but there are dead bodies all over the battlefield already. The fight ended. It's like he's coming in 8 years after the war.
Let's hear from Tom in Los Angeles on our Democrats line. Tom, you can see who you're on with there. Tim Miller, Sarah Longwell, and Jonathan V. Last.
Oh, and let me just say, as a huge Bulwark fan, I just want to say I commend three of my favorite hosts for adhering to the National Journal dress code exactly how I would expect them to on TV. So it's great to see them on TV. I'm curious because I've really been interested in following JVL in his last couple columns, really kind of pointing out, like, yes, Joe Biden has real electoral challenges. I think anyone who's realistic understands that. But on the flip side, there's, I think, a realism about understanding about what you actually have in terms of candidates as opposed to a wish list. And I'm curious if we're seeing the media kind of fall into this thing that we saw in 2007, where we saw Hillary Clinton win every single national presidential poll in 2007 by double digits, I think, except for 1 week when she only won by 8. And we all know how that, feeling of inevitability faded very quickly. And I'm just wondering if the media is trying to gin up some kind of horse race when there really isn't necessarily a horse race. So keep great work. Looking forward to the next podcast.
That's Tom in L.A. Who wants to answer? Go ahead.
I'll take it. Tom, the media is desperate for a horse race, which explains like the Vivek bump that we got after the debate. And the media is desperate for something other than Biden, because Biden has been, this incredibly boring president. Like he rides his bike and he creates jobs and he passes bipartisan bills. That's it. He's not tweeting at 2 a.m. He's not threatening, fire and fury at North Korea and stuff. But he's going to be the nominee, and I think he'll be a reasonably strong nominee because, again, the economy is just objectively in a very, very good place, and he's been a solid president. And if he was 65, this wouldn't be close. So, I think people either, come to terms with the age stuff or they won't. And after they see Trump for real every day dominating their televisions and their Twitter feeds and all that again, they'll either decide that they want the guy who has gotten unemployment to the level that it's at and passed the CHIPS Act and passed the infrastructure bill and stuff, or they want the guy who's under 91 criminal indictments. At that point, like, yay, democracy. We'll get what we deserve.
Chris, New Orleans, Republican.
Hello, folks. Mike Pence has been much more assertive lately, and should he catch fire, who should he pick as his running mate? And also, I hope that Tim has a mimosa on ice.
Hey, Chris, what's up?
So I got it.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say on the question of Mike Pence, I'll let Tim decide who his running mate should be. But I got to tell you, there is zero appetite for Mike Pence from Republican voters. If there has been anything that has been completely crystal clear in all of my focus groups, the Republican voters either think that he's in like the sour spot with voters, where people either think he's too close to Trump or They think he betrayed Trump over January 6th. I think the likelihood of him catching fire is about zero. And even the people who kind of like him think he is boring and are not interested in voting for him. And part of that is, so I say, you know, for people like Mike Pence, he built the permission structure for Donald Trump. He told people that it was fine. You didn't have to care about his multiple divorces. You didn't have to care about the fact that he was an immoral guy with lots of, you know, sexual assault accusations and all of the. He said that didn't matter. And as a result, voters have now decided those things don't matter, which means they're not that interested in a guy like Mike Pence, who really, you know, he stakes who he is on his sort of moral aptitude.
Yeah, I think Mike Pence should probably pick Jack Kemp as his VP since he's running for a party that's dead. I think that'd be a good selection for him, and good to see you hear from you from New Orleans.
And if
Can I just say real quick, Peter, though, I you know, and I'll be the only one to do this because Tim and Sarah make fun of me for it, but God bless Mike Pence, because this nation owes him a debt of gratitude. And sure, like for 4 years he was terrible and he went along with everything and he enabled. Understood. But since January 6th, the guy has been
enabled and did everything.
Has been performing a public service, and he hasn't done it perfectly, but he's been brave about it. Certainly braver than anybody else in the Republican field, excepting Asa Hutchinson and maybe Chris Christie. Anyway, Mike Pence has my gratitude, and I would be thrilled if he caught fire and was the Republican nominee.
Okay, right to left.
But
Jonathan V. last. Who is your favorite candidate? And then Sarah, and then Tim.
Like favorite candidate of all time?
No, right now in this race, right now.
Joe Biden. I don't think it's particularly close. Here's the question I would ask. Just sort of stripping away ideology, name a president in our lifetimes who has had a more successful first term in terms of policy. And I don't think there's much comparison. I think it's Biden.
Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I think if it's not been clear enough that I think this Republican field has been awful, because they have all been afraid to take on Trump. The one person who hasn't, you can put me with JVL on, certainly when it comes to a general election, I will certainly support Joe Biden against what I assume is Donald Trump. But the one person I think has been running a very good race is Chris Christie. And we also fight about this one. Tim gets really mad over us giving any props to Chris Christie, because he's another one who obviously did enable Trump, but he's been one of the few people, you know, it took a long time for anybody to criticize Trump at all. They're all supposed to be running against him. And at least Chris Christie is saying the things that need to be said to a Republican audience right now. And so I have appreciated that about him.
But Sarah, wouldn't you say that Joe Biden has really been Ronald Reagan's third term?
Maybe George H.W. Bush's second term.
No, JVL, I wouldn't say that.
Maybe George H.W.'s second term, besides that first spending bill and the student loan bailout. Hey, though, Chris Christie, don't try to. We can't move on from that. Chris Christie has not been running a good race. Chris Christie brought us Donald Trump. He wasn't just like one of the other enablers. Chris Christie was the first mainstream Republican to endorse Donald Trump. You know, he took out Marco Rubio and then endorsed Donald Trump, and then was an apologizer for him for 4 years, even after Donald Trump almost killed him with COVID. So no, I don't give Chris Christie any credit. I know that's maybe a difference that we have here. Probably the closest Republican to me is Will Hurd, and he's at 0%. So that tells you why I'm not a Republican anymore.
Cameron, Elk River,
Will Hurd,
Minnesota,
who also I love.
Independent line. Go ahead, Cameron.
Hi, big fan here. And Tim, my dad's from Louisiana, so I have to say it. Go Tigers.
Go Tigers.
I'm from Minnesota now, though, and so I won't get to say in the primary until Super Tuesday. So my question for all of you is, if you had to put money on it, who do you think will still be in the primary come Super Tuesday? Whether that's from doing well in the early states or sticking in like Kasich.
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, this is one where it's one where JVL and I are also argue, because I think that he thinks Ron DeSantis, I'll let him speak for himself, but I think he thinks Ron DeSantis is going to drop out early. I don't. I think it's going to be a money question, and I think the people who have money are going to be Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, and Ron DeSantis. I think those guys will be in the race, will still be in the race Super Tuesday. Unless in South Carolina, it is possible that somebody cuts a deal in the early phases with Trump. I've always thought that Tim Scott could end up being a natural vice presidential candidate for Donald Trump. And if Trump wants, Tim Scott's 10% in South Carolina, he could cut a deal going into those early races. So.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but I would say that of the names you listed, the one least likely to make it to Super Tuesday is DeSantis, because if he's getting schlonged early on, like, he's got to try to manage his decline in reputation and get out before bad gets worse. And the guy I think will still be in it is Vivek, because every vote Vivek gets helps his future prospects in the world. So
are you excited for that Minnesota primary where you get to vote Trump versus Vivek? Get ready for that.
Oh, Cam. So sorry, Cameron.
Our next call is from Will in Minneapolis, Democrats line. Go ahead, Will.
Hi. I heard you were just talking about Minneapolis. My question actually is slightly related. Marco Rubio won the primary here, and in Utah, Trump did very poorly. So there seem to be certain groups that are immune to, we'll say, the Maga movement, which I think since January 6th I would describe as more, I'll use the F word. So are there things over the decades that you have seen that you think make people more ripe to be, we'll say, drawn to a MAGA totalitarian movement? There's lots of theories out there, but do you have any kind of pet theories? And I'm just interested on a more like decade-to-decade level if you think this is going to keep going.
Tim Miller.
Yeah, I'll let JVL. JVL's probably better on the pet theory
This is
side
a
of
JVL
things.
question.
So, I'm just going to give you demographics really quick. So this is not judging anybody who didn't go to college or anything like that, but just if you just look at the math in the Republican Party, the college-educated Republicans, folks who have a higher degree, and actually Mormons. You mentioned Utah. Mormons were more resilient than evangelical voters and then non-college white voters to kind of the appeal of Trumpism. So I just think demographically, those are the two groups. But JVL is better at the more esoteric side of things.
Yeah, I mean, this is an open question, and I'm not answering it so much as just sort of thinking out loud. One of the things I look at a lot and think about a lot is decadence, and the extent to which, without an existential threat like we had during the Cold War, or even the sort of very near, clear, and present threat of terrorism following 9/11, with the economy being as really, in very good shape since about 2008 to now, without any major recessions, people have gotten the sense that politics is just about entertainment. And you can think all sorts of crazy stuff. You could be like, yeah, the frazzle drip, they're putting babies' faces on theirs and drinking adrenochrome, and Donald Trump is still actually president controlling the military. And there are no real practical consequences to it because life is good. We are a fat and happy people. And so long as life continues to be good, there's no reason to think people are going to start being serious about politics anymore.
Carolyn.
One other thing I'd feel remiss not to mention just really quick is race. When I was doing interviews for my book about my former colleagues about, who decided to go never Trump, who stuck with Trump, one trend that I just noticed was there were those of us during the Obama years that didn't like Obama's policies particularly, had some disagreements with him, but thought he was a good man, thought it was cool that we had our first black president, seemed like somebody that we respected and admired. Those of people who felt that way were more likely to be resistant to Trump, I noticed. The people who deeply hated and resented Obama, thought he was uppity, those people ended up going MAGA. So that's not a direct answer to your question, but I do think not mentioning race would be a mistake.
Carolyn, Austell, Georgia, Republicans line. Carolyn, go ahead.
Hello. I have quite a few questions, and maybe you can answer them afterward. I love Trump's work. I really do. And I'm looking at
Donald Trump?
Map.
Yeah,
Yes,
let
I
her
love
finish.
his work.
Let her finish,
Just
Tim.
making sure we were talking about the same guy.
I love his works, especially the border wall. It's a 6-hour drive from Atlanta, Georgia, all the way down to Florida. So I like that he started that wall, and I hate that other presidents didn't put as much into it. It probably would be finished. And I'm looking at his mouth when Maxine Waters spoke out against him, and when L.C. Hastings did, John Lewis and Senator Cummings, which they're no longer alive except for Maxine Waters is. You don't hear that speaking out against him as much. He did go after them, and he did, but I noticed that when they said something, then he spoke out. I really listened carefully. I thought maybe he did it before they spoke out. So I didn't like his mouth. And also, I'm looking at the way we left Afghanistan. I'm looking at how we're spending more money for oil. Crime is just rapid. Defunding the police. And I'm also looking at...
You know what, Carolyn? That's a lot on the table, and we got 3 talkers here, so we're going to leave it at those issues. Really appreciate you calling in. Tim Miller, Trump border wall, Trump responses, Afghanistan, oil, crime, defunding the police.
She started by saying that she thought Donald Trump did a good job. Well, he left the White House with a deadly assault on the Capitol and poop smeared across the Capitol. So I guess I'm going to have to disagree that Donald Trump did a good job. I did not love Joe Biden's the way that he left Afghanistan, but the American people wanted us to leave Afghanistan. We've been there for 20 years. I thought it was managed poorly. It's probably the thing that I was the most disappointed in the Biden administration. But all the rest of that, I mean, she liked Donald Trump's border wall. What border? Oh, he didn't even build the freaking border wall. So, I mean, I'm not for a border wall to begin with. We're a shining city on the hill. That's the whole point of the American experiment. So I'm not for it. But he didn't even do it. So he isn't even good at doing the bad stuff that he tried to do.
Sarah Longwell.
Sarah, do you want me to take this answer?
Go ahead.
I'm
Go ahead,
kidding.
JVL.
No, Sarah, I'm going to mute myself. Sarah, you, please, take this one.
I agree with Tim. Look, I hear this is in the focus groups when I listen to two-time Trump voters, one of the things that they are unanimous about is the idea that Trump did a great job. They think that he was a great president. And it is a little bit mystifying because during his presidency, 1 million people died of COVID. He had a very erratic strategy around COVID. He raised the debt by an enormous amount. He spent a ton of money. Tim's right. He didn't build the wall. And so I'm always a little bit surprised that people are so they think that he did a good job, but that is a very common response that people from Republican voters, they think. I think that woman was saying she doesn't like his mouth, which is also something you hear from a lot of voters. But what's always interesting to me is that people will say that I don't like some of the things that he says, but I loved his policies. And I'll say, what policies? And really the response is America First policies. And so what they mean is that he talked about immigration in a way that they liked, which was sort of tough. They liked the idea that he was talking about shooting people coming across the border in the leg. They liked that he talked about a wall. But the fact is he didn't do much of the things that he talked about. And I'm surprised that the people challenging him right now for the presidency don't talk more about his failures because otherwise it just persists, this myth that he did all this great stuff when he did very little. He passed one massive tax cut that impacted the rich much more than anybody else.
By the way, just as a fact matter, crime is down actually, and Joe Biden is like one of the biggest advocates for funding the police out there. So that's just a factual response there. We should hit
front page of the Wall Street Journal this morning. GOP searches for new message on abortion ahead of 2024. The Democrats ran quite successfully on this issue in 2022. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, of course that's a fair statement. I think that the GOP, I'm not of the view that abortion necessarily had to have been such a catastrophic issue for the GOP. I think that if you look at DeSantis, for example, he wins in Florida with a 15-week abortion ban, and then he comes back in this session and tries to pass a 5 or 6 week abortion ban with no exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother. Like, that is an insane, extreme position. And so had the Republicans responded to the overturn of Roe, with a more reasonable kind of restrictions, like European style restrictions on abortion, they would have been fine. They didn't do that. And so instead, I think there's been a massive backlash. I think that will be a problem in 2024. And you notice Trump is that's the one area where he kind of senses that. And he hasn't, gone as far into the ditch on that as DeSantis and others, despite the fact that he has extreme policies too.
David, San Francisco, Democrat. Please go ahead with your question or comment for our 3 guests.
Good morning. JVL, I was hoping that you could do the Cletus voice.
Oh, boy, no. I just dodged a bullet, David. I'm sorry. I expect an attaboy for my self-control.
What was he referring to? David, do you have anything else you wanted to ask or say?
No, that's all. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Jonathan V. last. What is the Cletus voice? Is this from The Simpsons?
Yes. Thank you. Peter, thank you. So on our show, which is politics, but we try to make it entertaining, I will occasionally do various characters. I do an excellent sort of old Southern lawyer, with a white suit like Colonel Sanders, who we call Foghorn Leghorn. And I do Cletus from Cletus and Lurleen on The Simpsons, as well as Skinny Joey, who is a gentleman of Italian-American descent from North Jersey. And for some reason, some of my co-hosts with blonde hair get very upset about two of those three voices.
Sarah Longwell, why does Cletus upset you?
I, as I say, do a lot of these.
This is the best show ever.
I listen to people talk. I listen to people talk a lot, and I respect these voters, and they have diverse opinions. JVL can sometimes be somewhat dismissive of some of the people and imitates them in ways that I think the mocking is untoward.
We're all God's children, Sarah. We're all God's children.
Some of us just have really dumb opinions.
Rip is in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Republican line. Go ahead, Rip.
You three scare me to death. And you were terribly wrong about so much of what you said. And what you said was that Biden has created an immigration, the largest migration in the history of mankind. If you want to see what America's going to look like in the next 2 years, look at New York City right now. Look at Chicago. You guys are terribly wrong. You give me but you guys.
Tell me more.
New York City has one of the lowest
Rip,
murder rates in the country.
I think we got your point. Let's get a response from our guests.
Yeah, New York City has one of the lowest murder rates in the country. It's much safer to be in New York City than in most of red America. So I don't know what, I think I might know what you're talking about, what you're worried about, but I won't say it. And look, this is America, right? We have always been a diverse and changing country. People are going to want to come here. I think that Joe Biden could have changed some things at the border. Probably we disagree on what. I think for starters, we should make it a lot easier for people to get here. One of the biggest problems with inflation right now is that we don't have enough workers to meet all the demand. And so it would be great to bring back a guest worker program instead of ending that because of fear mongering and racism and Donald Trump's BS. But anyway, so I guess we have some disagreements at the border, but I don't think that the country is as scary as you think it is.
Sarah Longwell, how many people listen to The Next Level?
Oh, so many people. I don't necessarily. We are on YouTube, where we have many thousands of people who watch us on YouTube, and then I'd say about 50,000 a week. We have a couple shows though. So Tim actually does a show that airs on that he does at the Sunday show, where he interviews guests, and then the three of us get together and talk politics every Wednesday. And a lot of people tune in various places, and I hope you will too. We have a lot of fun.
When you say get together, do you get physically together in one room to do this?
Oh, no, that's terrible. We don't ever do that. I don't like being near people.
We do it sometimes.
I like to touch JVL, so I wish.
The last time we did it, Tim gave me COVID, so I was really scared straight since
He
then.
gave us all COVID.
Charlie's in Rosalind Heights, New York, independent line. Charlie, please go ahead with your question or comment for the co-hosts of The Next Level.
Can is in the okay, but I never saw anybody like him, and I don't want to.
I apologize. That's a bad connection. We cannot hear you. We're going to move on to Tom in Baltimore, Democrat. Please go ahead, Tom.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Here in Maryland, we have a Larry Hogan, who's elected governor overwhelmingly in a heavily Democratic state, Maryland. And several months ago, he was talking about running for candidate for Republican for president. Now he's toying with the idea of perhaps a third party. I was wondering if your guests have any comment about Larry Hogan.
Okay,
Sarah.
This is for me. I love Larry Hogan. Yep. I think Larry Hogan is a tremendous
Go get the candle,
governor.
Sarah. Go get his
Popular.
candle that you got.
Saint Larry.
I like
As we
Larry
call him on
Hogan
the show.
a lot. I like him a lot. It's true. Here's the thing, though. Larry Hogan is doing something right now that I am not supportive of, deeply alarmed by, which is that he is talking about this idea of running as a third-party candidate, or he's sort of toying with it. And there's this group, No Labels, that is talking about a third-party candidate with moderates. And listen, you right here, I know that we terrify some of your callers, as they've said, but we are we are sort of moderate centrists, the three of us in various ways. And so somebody like Larry Hogan or a centrist party would be appealing to us if we weren't dealing with a situation where Donald Trump is the most likely candidate and who is an extremely dangerous anti-democracy candidate who led a coup, would not engage in the peaceful transfer of power the last time. And so a third-party candidate that would basically help Donald Trump, because as we've noted, there is some enthusiasm problems when it comes to Joe Biden. And I think that there is a section of the country that rather than who would otherwise would vote for Joe Biden, but instead would be happy to ditch out and go third party for a moderate. And what that will do is ultimately reelect Donald Trump. And I think the level of danger that Donald Trump presents should make people very cautious and very concerned about the idea of doing anything that would reelect him. So I would appeal to Governor Hogan not to do that. But he was a tremendous governor and he's a great guy.
Douglas, Chicago, Republican. Please go ahead.
All right.
This is a question mainly for Sarah, but anybody can jump in. You work in on the podcast, I'm proud Bulwark Plus member, should throw that in. You did a lot of talk about movies on your shows. You always drop in the movie references. And my question to you is, do you think there will ever be a sincere movie made about the log cabin Republicans, either a documentary or a fictional rom-com type of movie? Because it seems like an aspect of gay history that's not really been explored.
Douglas, are you a log cabin Republican?
I'm not, but I am fascinated by the group and have been for a long time.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, I thought that was going to be a movie question I was going to get to answer, but instead it's about log cabin.
The prime of Miss Jean Brody. The answer is the prime of Miss Jean Brody.
It's still my favorite movie. But yes, I was the head of the Log Cabin Republicans, the gay Republican group, or the board chair, right up until the point where Trump became the president, and then I resigned because I couldn't support him. I do think I actually did make a documentary at one point about log cabin and the way that it was founded, because it was a deeply interesting story. But I think it is the story of gay Republicans and the role that they played in helping to bring gay marriage and advocate for it within the Republican Party, as well as the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, is an extraordinary story. And one that should be told in a more mainstream way. I agree.
Wasn't Top Gun a movie about the log cabin Republicans? I do think we already did that, though.
I don't think that's right.
Oh, okay.
Robert's in Greenville, North Carolina. Go ahead, Robert. Independent line.
Good morning. If we can't take care of Tuberville, we shouldn't even be talking about an election. If the Democrats are letting Tuberville, one senator, one idiot that Donald Trump put in that seat, and what he's doing to the country and the risk he's putting us at, our greatest danger is Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Let's get that straight. It's not Putin or she. It's Donald Trump and the Republican Party, the hardcore Republican Party. They are not going to give up anything. They're going to do the same thing again, and they're going to ruin the country.
That's Robert in Greenville, North Carolina. Let's go down the line because we have 2 minutes left, beginning with Tim, Sarah, Jonathan V. last. Go ahead.
I agreed with him. I wanted to get back to that Republican line. I wanted to hear from more people that are scared of brown folks coming to America. I thought that would have been good to discuss. But I totally agree. I don't think that it's really the Democrats' fault that Tommy Tuberville's in there. He's the senator from Alabama. And so, I thought that the Doug Jones race was a very big outlier. It took a pedophile in Roy Moore being his opponent to get a Democrat in there. So maybe it could happen again, but I'm not that optimistic about Alabama.
Sarah.
Yeah, Tuberville is bad. What he is doing right now to military readiness by not allowing people to get confirmed, he's singularly holding them up, is terrible. And I can't believe that this is the story of the Republican Party right now. They are supposedly the pro-military party, but they are doing nothing about the fact that Tuberville is single-handedly affecting military readiness. And Republican voters in his state don't seem to be frustrated by this, but they should be. And this is another way in which the Republican Party has sort of purported to be one thing for a long time, pro-military, but their actions betray that at every turn these days.
Well, they like soldiers just as long as they don't like poetry. You know, you don't want any gay stuff on the boat. You know, we don't want any gay stuff on those Navy ships. All right, like that's a no-go.
Jonathan V, you get the last word here.
Yeah, one of the things we talk a lot on the show is the fundamental structural asymmetries in American politics. And Tommy Tuberville and the military is a perfect example of this. So we had a caller who complained about how Joe Biden was defunding the police. Why do we have that caller saying that? It's because a handful of progressives on Twitter and Cori Bush, who is a backbencher in the Democratic House caucus, agitated for defunding the police. It really did hurt Democrats in the 2020 election. It showed up. You could talk to Democratic strategists. They'll tell you it was a real effect. Joe Biden is in favor of increasing funding of the police and is a big supporter of the police. And in fact, has done that, has spent more money on police. But voters don't seem to assimilate that. But then you get Tommy Tuberville, who is actively trying to hurt the military readiness. And I don't think that any Republicans are going to pay an electoral price from that. And that's because, again, we have this fundamental asymmetry between what people and voters expect from Republicans and what they expect from Democrats.
The publication is The Bulwark. The podcast is The Next Level. And we've been talking with the three co-hosts. Thank you all very much for being on the Washington Journal.
Thank you. Go Tigers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
And thank you all for watching. We appreciate you being with us. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.